This happened to me about 3 years ago. I've never told anyone the full story. Not really. It started as most unsettling things do, with something incredibly mundane. My unit was on the second floor, facing the parking lot and a strip of patchy grass that separated us from the building next door. The building next door was identical, another 3-story brick structure, and my unit directly overlooked one of its second-floor windows. I was working remotely then, a freelance graphic designer, which meant I spent a lot of time at home. My routine was pretty predictable. Wake up, coffee, work, lunch, work, maybe a walk or some errands, dinner, a little evening TV or reading, then bed. The neighbor in the window across from me, the one I could see from my living room and bedroom, was this guy. I'll call him Arthur. I never actually spoke to him. I saw him occasionally, usually in the evenings, silhouetted against his window. He had a habit of standing by the window, sometimes for long stretches just looking out. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People look out windows. It's what windows are for. Then it started to feel a little intentional. I'd be sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone or watching something, and I'd glance up, drawn by some instinct, and there he would be, a dark shape against the light, facing my direction. I remember one specific evening. I was wearing my favorite worn-out sweatpants and a t-shirt, just lounging. I had a bowl of popcorn balanced on my lap. I looked up from my phone, and there he was, not just looking out the window, but his head was slightly tilted, as if he was focusing. I started drawing the blinds more often. Not all the way, just enough to obscure the view. It felt a little ridiculous, like I was hiding from a ghost. But the feeling persisted. That sense of being observed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, a prickle of unease on my skin, and my eyes would dart to the window. Sometimes in the deeper darkness, I thought I saw a faint outline, a subtle shift in the gloom where his window was. I started avoiding my own living room window after dark. I'd do my work in my bedroom, which faced a different direction, or retreat to the kitchen. It was a stupid, irrational fear. I knew that. One afternoon, I was taking out my trash to the communal bins behind the building. As I was walking back, I saw him. He was standing on his small balcony, which was on the side of the building, not facing my unit directly. But his head was turned, and he was looking towards my building. He had on a dark, nondescript jacket, and I could see his face a little more clearly in the daylight. He was gaunt, with sharp features and eyes that seemed too large for his face. He didn't acknowledge me, but his gaze was fixed, unwavering. I mentioned it to my friend Sarah. We were grabbing coffee. "This neighbor, Arthur, or whatever his name is," I said, trying to sound casual, "he just stands at his window like all night, facing my place." One night I decided I'd had enough. I was going to confront him, or at least acknowledge him. I was sitting on my couch, watching a movie, when I felt that familiar prickle. I glanced up. He was there, standing at his window, facing mine. I stood up, walked to my own window, and slowly, deliberately pulled back the blind. He was still there. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just stared. His face was very pale in the dim light, and his eyes were wide, unblinking. My breath hitched. My hands started to tremble. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, meeting his gaze across the vacant space between our buildings. Then came the noises. It started subtly. Little taps. At first, I wrote them off as the building settling or branches brushing against the outside walls. but they became more distinct. A rhythmic tapping coming from the direction of my window. Asterisk tappy tappy tap asterisk. One evening the tapping escalated. It wasn't just gentle taps anymore. It was a distinct asterisk rap 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 asterisk against the glass. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze. I didn't dare move. I just stood there, my ears straining, my body rigid. And there, pressed against the glass, was a pale, distorted smudge. It wasn't clear, but it looked like a handprint. A child's handprint almost, but too wide, too elongated. It was smeared as if it had been pressed there with frantic effort. I started seeing things. Fleeting movements in my peripheral vision. Shadows that seemed to detach themselves from corners. I'd be walking down the hallway of my apartment building, and I'd swear I saw him, Arthur, just a few feet ahead, walking away, his gray robe a ghostly blur. Then one night it wasn't the tapping. It was a whisper. I was in bed trying to force myself to sleep. I had my back to the window, but I could feel its presence, a cold, heavy weight in the room. And then I heard it. A faint, sibilant whisper right outside my bedroom door. I dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered on the tile floor, the sound echoing in the sudden heavy silence. I stumbled backward, my hands flying to my mouth, a silent scream tearing through me. Arthur just kept smiling, his gaze locked on mine. He raised a hand slowly and pointed, not at my window but at me. This happened to me about 2 years ago. I've never told anyone the full story, not even to my therapist, and believe me, I've been through a lot of those. It started subtly, like a slow leak in the roof you don't notice until the plaster starts to buckle. I just moved into a new apartment. It was a decent place, a little older, but clean and with a small, overgrown backyard that I was looking forward to taming. The rent was reasonable for the area, and it was close enough to my commute to work. My old place had been a shoebox, and this felt like a significant upgrade. The living room was spacious. The kitchen had actual counter space, and the bedroom, while not huge, had a walk-in closet, which was a luxury I'd only dreamed of. The neighbor in the apartment next to mine was a man named Mr. He was older, maybe in his late 60s or early 70s, with a shock of thin, white hair and a perpetual stoop. He always wore the same faded gray cardigan, no matter the weather. We'd exchanged pleasantries a few times in the hallway. He'd nod, a tight little smile on his lips, and say, "Lovely day, isn't it?" or "Keeping busy." I'd reply, of course, and then we'd go our separate ways. He seemed harmless. A bit reclusive, maybe, but not in a way that felt menacing, just quiet. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes and settling in. I'd come home from work, exhausted, and dive into my nightly routine, a quick dinner, some TV, maybe a bit of reading. The apartment was surprisingly quiet. The walls were thicker than I expected, and the usual urban symphony of sirens and distant arguments seemed muffled. I appreciated the peace. Then, the small things started to creep in. It began with noise. Or rather the lack of noise. Henderson was usually pretty quiet, but there were nights I'd be awake, unable to sleep, and I'd realize I hadn't heard a single sound from his apartment all evening. No TV, no radio, no footsteps. It wasn't a disturbing silence, not at first, just an observation. I'd chalk it up to him being a sound sleeper, or maybe he went to bed early. Then came the feeling. A persistent, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched. It would happen when I was in my living room, especially when I was near the window that looked out onto the shared patch of yard. The blinds were slats, not solid, so they offered privacy, but light still filtered through. I'd catch myself glancing at the window, expecting to see something, anything, but there was never anything there. Just the night, the dark outline of trees and the faint glow of street lights. I started to get jumpy. Every creak of the building, every distant car horn would make me flinch. I'd dismiss it as stress from work or the general adjustment period of a new place. It's just your imagination, I'd tell myself, trying to force the unease away. One evening, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone. The blinds were mostly closed, but a sliver of light from outside managed to penetrate. I looked up, and for a split second I thought I saw a shadow move behind the blinds of Mr. Henderson's living room window. It was gone before I could even register it, a fleeting darkness against the dim light. I shook my head. "Too much screen time," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. The next day I went out for groceries. When I got back, I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. The air felt heavy, stagnant. As I was putting my keys down, I noticed something odd. The deadbolt. I always triple checked the deadbolt. It was latched, of course, but it had been turned back. Just a fraction, enough to disengage. I distinctly remembered locking it. I'd made a point of it, a little ritual to ensure I was secure. My heart did a little stutter step. Had I forgotten? Had I been so preoccupied with unpacking that I'd rushed my usual routine? I convinced myself that was it. I was tired, stressed, making mistakes. I made sure to carefully lock the deadbolt, listening to the satisfying thunk as it engaged. That night I couldn't sleep. The feeling of being watched was more intense than ever. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. I got up and went to the living room window again. The blinds were closed, but I could see the faint outlines of the trees outside. And then I saw it again. This time it lingered. It was a tall, thin shape pressed against the gap in Mr. Henderson's blinds. It wasn't moving. It was just there. A cold dread washed over me. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my own paranoia. I went to my bedroom and locked the door just like I always did. The next mornings were a haze. I was barely sleeping, and when I did, it was fitful and filled with unsettling dreams I couldn't quite recall. I started to notice things about Mr. Henderson himself. He began to appear more frequently, always at odd times. I'd see him in the hallway, just standing there looking at my door. He wouldn't say anything, just a blank expression on his face. When he saw me, he'd offer that same tight smile, and sometimes he'd nod slowly, his eyes fixed on mine for just a beat too long. One afternoon, I was getting out of my car in the parking lot. I was fumbling with my groceries and I looked up. Henderson was standing by his car across the lot, watching me. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't wave, didn't call out. He just watched. The moment our eyes met, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It felt like a sign, and it sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. I started to feel like I was living in a dream. The mundane was becoming surreal. I'd walk to the kitchen for a glass of water and swear I heard a faint scraping sound from the wall between our apartments. It was too rhythmic to be the building settling. It sounded like something soft being dragged. I was talking to my friend Sarah on the phone one evening. I was trying to sound casual, but my voice was trembling. "This new place is okay, I guess," I said, pulling my sleeve up and down nervously. "Just feeling a bit isolated." "Oh, come on," Sarah said, her voice cheerful. "You've only been there a few weeks. You'll make friends. Have you met the neighbors yet?" "Yeah, there's an older guy next door," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "He's quiet." "Quiet is good," Sarah replied. You don't want noisy neighbors, like that horror show I had in my last apartment. Kept me up all night with their whatever they were doing. I forced a laugh. Quiet is definitely good. But even as I said it, the scraping sound seemed to intensify, a soft, dragging whisper just beyond the wall. I ended the call quickly, my heart pounding. I began to avoid my own windows. I kept the blinds almost entirely closed, living in a perpetual twilight. The feeling of being watched only grew. It was no longer just a feeling, it was a certainty. I knew with a chilling finality that he was watching me. His apartment was directly next to mine. The wall between us was solid. The windows faced different directions. Then came the lights. It was late one night. I was lying in bed, the room dark, trying to force myself to sleep. The silence in the apartment was absolute, too absolute. It was the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. Suddenly, I heard it. A soft click followed by a faint hum. It was coming from outside. I crept out of bed and went to my bedroom window, the one that faced the backyard. The blinds were thin and I could see through them, and I saw him. He was standing at the edge of his property, just inside the tree line where his yard met mine. He was holding something, a flashlight, a small, dim beam of light. He wasn't shining it at my windows. He was shining it at *me*, directly at my bedroom window. My blood ran cold. He knew I was there. He knew I was in bed. He was standing in the darkness just a few yards away, pointing a beam of light directly at me. I scrambled back, fumbling for the lamp on my nightstand. I switched it on and the room was flooded with light. I immediately went to the window and yanked the blinds shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the fabric. I stood there, frozen, my back pressed against the cold glass, listening. The hum had stopped. The light was gone. But the feeling of being watched, of being *targeted*, was overwhelming. I stayed like that for a long time, my breathing ragged, my eyes wide in the sudden, too bright glare of the lamp. The next morning I was exhausted. I avoided Mr. Henderson's apartment like the plague. I even took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, just in case I ran into him. I ate breakfast at my desk at work, and I didn't leave until I absolutely had to. That evening, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head. I put on my headphones, cranked up the volume, and just walked. I walked for miles, through different neighborhoods, just trying to outrun the unease that clung to me like a second skin. When I finally got back to my apartment, it was well past midnight. I unlocked my door, and as I stepped inside, I noticed something else. The faint scent of something metallic, like old pennies or dried blood. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. It seemed to be strongest near the living room. I walked towards it, my senses on high alert. Then I saw it. On the floor, just inside the living room near the window, was a small, dark stain. It was about the size of a quarter. It was dry, crusty. I knelt down, my stomach churning. It looked like dried blood. I recoiled, scrambling back. My mind was racing. Whose blood? How did it get there? Had he somehow gotten into my apartment? I checked the locks again. The deadbolt was firmly engaged. I checked the windows. They were all locked too. The stain was on the inside. Panic started to set in. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, like 1,000 tiny needles. I looked at the window, then back at the stain. It was too much, too connected. I spent the rest of the night huddled on my couch, the lights on, my phone clutched in my hand. I called Sarah, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. I just mumbled something about feeling sick and needing to talk. She was kind, as always, but I could hear the distance in her voice. She couldn't understand. How could she? The next day I called my landlord. I explained that I was concerned about a potential pest problem, a strange smell, and that I wanted them to check for any breaches in the building's integrity. He was dismissive. "We don't have pest problems at this building, sir. And it's a very secure structure. You must be imagining things." That night the scraping sound returned. It was louder this time, more insistent. It was coming from the wall behind my bed. Drag, 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 slow, deliberate. It sounded like something heavy being moved, inch by agonizing inch, across a rough surface. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel the vibration through the mattress. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept by my bed and crept out into the hallway. I moved towards Mr. Henderson's apartment door. I stood there listening. The scraping had stopped. Only the faint hum of the building's systems remained. I could hear my own ragged breath. Hesitantly, I reached out and knocked. I knocked again, louder this time, still nothing. It was as if the apartment was empty, but I knew it wasn't. I'd seen him. He was always there. I stepped back, my mind a whirl of fear and confusion. What was he doing? Why was he doing it? And then I saw it again. Through the tiny peephole in Mr. Henderson's door, a sliver of light, a faint movement. Something was in there, something was watching. I didn't run. I couldn't. I just stood there, my hand still raised, my breath catching in my throat. And in that brief, terrifying moment I saw it. A pair of eyes. Pale, blank eyes, staring directly back at me through the peephole. They weren't human eyes, they were too large, and they were glowing. A faint, phosphorescent glow like a deep-sea creature. I stumbled back, gasping, my hand flying to my mouth. I didn't scream, I couldn't. The sound was trapped in my chest. I turned and fled, not to my apartment, but out the front door of the building into the cold, indifferent night. I haven't been back to that apartment since. I broke my lease. I left everything behind. My furniture, my clothes, my books. I just ran. I'm staying at a friend's place now, a few towns over. I sleep with the lights on. I check every door, every window, a dozen times before I even think about closing my eyes. But the feeling of being watched, it hasn't left me. It's still there. A phantom pressure on my skin, a cold dread that coils in my stomach. This happened to me about 2 years ago. I've never told anyone the full story. Not really. I've hinted at it, sure, to close friends, but mostly I've kept it locked away. A cold knot in my stomach that tightens whenever I think about that stretch of time. I live in a pretty standard suburban neighborhood now. A small house with a decent yard. But back then I was in a third-floor apartment. A place I thought was perfectly safe, perfectly anonymous. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember it was a Tuesday, because Tuesdays were my laundry days. The smell of bleach and fabric softener filled my tiny bathroom as I loaded the machine. The apartment itself was nothing special. Beige walls, worn-out carpet, a window in the living room that overlooked a patch of scraggly trees, and, unfortunately, the apartment building across the street. My neighbor in 3B, a man named Arthur, was a ghost. I'd lived there for 6 months and had seen him maybe twice. He was a quiet guy, middle-aged, with thinning gray hair and eyes that seemed to always be looking somewhere else. The first time I noticed anything was actually quite mundane. I was sitting on my couch, watching some terrible reality TV, a glass of cheap wine on the coffee table. I happened to glance towards the window, towards Arthur's building, and I saw him. He was standing at his window, silhouetted against the dim light from his apartment. He wasn't looking out at the street or the sky. He was looking directly at my window. Then it happened again, a few nights later. I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth in the bathroom. I looked out the small bathroom window, which also faced Arthur's building, albeit from a different angle. And there he was again, standing at his window, again looking directly at my apartment. This time it felt a little more deliberate. He wasn't just casually looking. It was like he was observing, staring. I felt a prickle of unease. I quickly turned away, rinsed my mouth, and hurried into my bedroom, pulling the blinds shut with a little more force than necessary. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern, a nightly occurrence. I'd be in the living room and I'd see his silhouette. I'd be in the kitchen making a late-night snack and I'd catch a glimpse of him at his window. I started to avoid looking out my own windows. I'd draw the curtains early, even when it was still light out, just to avoid the possibility. It sounds silly now, but back then it felt like a game of silent, unnerving hide-and-seek. One evening I was having coffee with my friend Sarah. We were sitting at my kitchen table, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flicker of movement in Arthur's window. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the distant rumble of a car. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. That evening, as I was eating dinner, I saw him again. This time, it was different. He wasn't just standing. He was holding something. It was dark, rectangular, and in the dim light, it looked like a camera. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was taking pictures of me, of my apartment. He was filming me. I dropped my fork. It clattered against the plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Panic set in. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to unlock it. Who could I call? The police? What would I say? My neighbor is watching me with a camera. They'd think I was crazy. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bedroom, the lights on, the blinds pulled down tight. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just listened. Listened for any sound that might indicate he was getting closer, that he was coming for me. That evening, as soon as I got home, I made a decision. I was going to confront him. It was a terrible idea, I knew it, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to know what he wanted. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached his door, 3B. I hesitated for a moment, then knocked. Still nothing. I pressed my ear against the wood. I could hear a faint humming sound like a refrigerator, but no footsteps, no voices. Just as I was about to turn away, a tiny click came from inside the apartment. It was followed by a faint, scraping sound. Then I heard it. A soft, wet thud. I practically ran back to my apartment, fumbling with my keys, my hands slick with sweat. I slammed the door shut, locking it with every lock I had. I ran to my living room window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Arthur's window was dark, completely dark. The blinds were drawn, and then something new. A faint, rhythmic scratching. It was coming from my wall, the wall that separated my living room from the hallway. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. A soft, persistent scratching. Asterisk scritch, scritch, scritch. Asterisk, it sounded like fingernails on plaster.